Hello everyone. As we are discussing Whitman nowadays, how we talked in the previous video that how Whitman is a poet who admires both body and soul. So there is a famous quote by Whitman himself: I am the poet of the body and I am the poet of the soul. And that's why he says further, and I quote, I will not praise one without the other, or any more than the other. It means he gives equal importance to both body and soul. He does not want to consider any of them as inferior to other. Like Emerson, Whitman saw all objects and persons interrelated in a single oneness. See, that shows that how he was influenced by transcendentalism, of which Emerson was a famous practitioner. There is a poem by Emerson which name is Each and All. In that particular poem, one can perceive that how the poet talks that how each things are visible and how all is visible in each things, as we call in Sanskrit Pinde te Brahmande, means what is there in Pind, the same is there in Brahmand. In that manner, Pind is microcosm of Brahmand, and Brahmand is macrocosm of Pind. In the similar manner, we have each as microcosm of all and all as microcosm of each. The same philosophy we find in Whitman also, who sees all objects and persons interrelated to a single oneness. Sometimes one can connect it to the concept of Atma and Paramatma as well, that how Atma is considered to be the fraction, one of the fractions of Paramatma, and how all Atma means souls try to be united with that oversoul, Paramatma. Whitman begins and ends with his self. See, he was very much concerned with his self. Whenever he says my body and my soul. So my word was with the emphasis there in his conversation, in his depiction, in his writing. He says, and I quote, I celebrate myself and sing myself. See, he does not need any other particular person for admiration. And now you have to understand that when he says myself, his myself is not what we generally perceive with the concept of myself. His myself means, that is the example of each, and while talking of each, he is talking of all. So while talking of himself, when he says myself, he is talking of all other people. will understand this. Further, he goes farther by saying, one's self I sing, a simple separate person, yet utter the world democratic, the world en masse. This en masse is a very famous phrase used by Whitman. ENMASSE means, the people, the group of people, mass. So he says that when he is singing of himself, when one's self I sing, means when he is singing, when he is talking of himself, a simple separate person, in that manner he can be considered as an individual. So he says, when I'm talking of myself, I'm singing of myself, you can take it as I'm talking of an individual, yet utter the word democratic. Even then he says that I use the word democratic, and when you talk of democratic or democracy, then you have to talk of the people. As we know the famous definition of Abraham Lincoln, democracy is the rule by people, of the people, to the people. So while talking of himself, he is talking of his people. He saw democracy as the form of society which would allow the fullest and for a freest development for each man's self. So that is very positive attitude of him towards democracy. He thinks that democracy gives the freedom to the single individual for developing fullest and freest, would bring out each man's divinity. Think about it. When you give freedom to the individuals, the energy that is preserved there in the individuals, that makes them that much developed so that they can attain their divinity. As we can understand that when Atma or the soul gets development, it makes united with Paramatma, that is Oversoul. Means there is certain period at the peak we can't differentiate this Atma, soul, and Paramatma, that is Oversoul. What I perceive, the example of a cotyledon can be best suited here. Cotyledon, that is present there in the seed. When we sow that in the soil, the energy that is already preserved there in the cotyledon, that compels, that gives the force, that gives the life to the cotyledon so that it can get developed. And ultimately, with the help of that energy, the shoot comes out of the soil and the root goes inside the soil. That shows the development. That shows the development of that cotyledon into a sapling of a plant. And ultimately, that energy that is there within that cotyledon makes it developed to the fullest, to the freest. Then it attains what it is really made for. A cotyledon, a seed, is destined to become a tree, but for that it needs proper environment, it needs full freedom. So is the case with the people, and that freedom can be given through democracy to the people, what Whitman perceives. See, what can be said in better manner than this when we say that Whitman is the closest thing America has had to a national poet. Means nationalism we can find very easily in Whitman's poetry. So it's not a hyperbole to say that he is like a national poet of America. Even you'll find a quote that he is America. Whitman is America. His Leaves of Grass, which was once considered as the expression of a beast. See, the negative criticism that people had about Leaves of Grass initially, and it was declared as the expression of a beast, is now regarded as the Bible of democracy. Think about it. Now that particular work of art, Leaves of Grass, is considered as the Bible of democracy. Bible word is being used for that particular work, which was considered as the expression of a beast. This is how when the people perceive the actuality, the actual thing, the actual substance in a particular work of art, then they start realizing its importance. So why is his work Leaves of Grass considered as the Bible of democracy? Since democracy is the keynote of his poetry. You will find democracy everywhere in his poems. You know, Whitman was a great admirer of Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln, the 16th president of USA. When the Civil War broke out, he was 42 years old. Whitman was 42 years old. And he saw, much energy in Abraham Lincoln, and he expected a lot from him. And of course, his expectation got requited when Civil War ended from 1861 to 1865. But ultimately, ironically, with the loss of Abraham Lincoln, when he was on 14th April 1865, he got assassinated by his one political rival, John Wilkes Booth, when he was watching a play with his wife, Mary. See, one ironical thing that I have observed. The person who worked for Indian democracy, who worked for Indian Constitution, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, he was born on 14th April. And there in USA, the person well known for his leadership, democracy, was shot dead on the same date. This is how we can remember the dates as well. So when Lincoln was shot dead, Whitman was very sad, and ultimately his sadness came in the form of two great elegies. One is When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloomed. Lilac, you understand, Lilac, that is a kind of flower, a yellow flower. When lilacs last in the dooryard bloomed. This is an elegy by Whitman for the lamentation of the death of Abraham Lincoln. The second, the more famous elegy written by Whitman for Lincoln, and that is prescribed there in even in 6, 7, 8 syllabus in CBSE board schools as well in India. The other elegy that is there, "O Captain, my Captain," the very famous elegy, the second elegy by Whitman for Lincoln. Now let's talk something about Leaves of Grass. We cannot forget it. We have to come again and again to this particular work of art, because this is the work that has made Whitman as Whitman what we know today. After reading the first edition of Leaves of Grass, that was published in 1855, Emerson wrote a letter to Whitman. At the time, Emerson was not known to Whitman. He was a new poet for him. So he writes, and I quote, "The most extraordinary piece of wit that America has yet contributed." Most extraordinary piece of wit. So wit is there in that work of art, Leaves of Grass. That shows the wisdom, the intellect of the poet. What is being appreciated by Emerson, Ralph Waldo Emerson, the great name of American literature. Further he says, "I find the courage of treatment which so delights me." Courage of treatment, of course, the person who is depicting sex very, very frankly should be considered as courageous in the orthodoxical society. "I find the courage of treatment which so delights me, and which large perception only can inspire." Large perception, when one can have after reading the poems, one can be inspired. "I greet you at the beginning of a great career." So in that way, it was a prophetic way of saying that Whitman was going to have a great career in his future. And it was the response of Emerson after reading the first edition of Leaves of Grass. So when the second edition was published, he quoted Emerson in his preface of the second edition, and he replies there. What is his reply? See, he says, Whitman says, and I quote, "The work of my life is making poems." As if he was born for just composing poems. And of course that he did. That we can see his effort in amelioration, in the improvement of Leaves of Grass, day by day, years by years, from 1855 to 1892. In the third edition of Leaves of Grass, we find a collection of poems, that is a group of poems, which name is Children of Adam. Adam, as you know, the great forefather, or you can say the first man. Adam and Eve, first man and woman. So in that collection of poems, Children of Adam, what do we find? It's about love. Which kind of love? In rebellion against conventional attitudes towards sex. General perception, general attitude the people have regarding that is totally being violated, totally being rebelled against by poet in this work, Children of Adams. And in praise of all natural physiological functions. This is how poet perceives the world. Poets, they don't bother about others' perception. They feel what they think is right. That is how they become rebellion in the society. And that rebellion behavior ultimately makes them provides them a particular place in the niche of fame. Niche, you understand? Niche, a particular place. Just search it and find out its proper meaning. There is another collection of poems in the third edition. Its name is Calasmus. 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 It's another group of poems about manly love. Manly love means how a man loves another man. Frequent detailed descriptions of which suggests that Whitman had a latent homosexual tendency. He is considered to be a homosexual, and he publicly accepted, I think, that he was homosexual. So he had this tendency, and that tendency is very well visualized, very well understood by reading his poems when you find the detailed descriptions of manly love. When you talk of writers being homosexual, there comes the names of Oscar Wilde also, after Whitman. Even it is said that they used to converse through letters as well, this Oscar Wilde and Whitman. Another name, great name, is that of Virginia Woolf. Very frank description or treatment of homosexuality you will find in her work also, in description of Orlando. Let's talk of two pamphlets by Whitman. One is Drum Taps, and the second one is sequel of that is sequel to Drum Taps. What were these? These were the pamphlets, two pamphlets of poems. So even in these pamphlets, these were the poems there, and it was about Civil War and Lincoln. See, Civil War and Lincoln, they are very much interconnected. We cannot talk of Lincoln without discussing Civil War. You cannot talk of Civil War of America without having discussion of Lincoln. Then there comes another work, that is prose essays, the name of which is Democratic Vista, Vistas. It was published in 1871. These were prose essays on democracy and personalism. When you talk of the depiction of democracy, the discussion of democracy here in this particular work, Democratic Vista, we find that here Whitman gives a response. It's a kind of reply for Thomas Carlyle, what he writes for democracy. So in response of which Whitman has written, but ultimately he accepts most of the views of Thomas Carlyle. Thomas Carlyle is a very famous name in English literature. It is said that Thomas Carlyle, and when you read Thomas Carlyle, you will find some elements of Emerson's personality there in Carlyle. Both were the great lecturers. They used to, they were famous for their oratory, Emerson and Carlyle, and they used to exchange letters also. They used to write letters to each other. That's all for today. Thank you.